Well, hello everyone, and welcome to AIGA, Design for Good, Diversity and Inclusion webcast series, a program brought to you by an award from the NEA. Today we have an opportunity to address the notion of implicit bias. It is a notion that's been discussed a lot at AIGA throughout our different initiatives. And we are interested in bringing this conversation to the front as we are coping with a diversity and inclusion task force that has been helping us asking questions around representation, around the way we consider ourselves an inclusive organization, and what are the different strategies and activities that we can do to demonstrate this inclusiveness. I think that overall, there is the sense that we all need to gain a higher consciousness of these issues and these notions. Sometimes there's a bit of a denial around recognizing their very existence, and also trying to figure out how design can be a tool to shift perspectives, to shift public perspective on these problems that America is facing today. So I wanted to give you like a broad overview of the question that we will be asking today, and then introduce you to our amazing speakers. The first question is like, how can we encourage mindfulness of this implicit bias and stereotypes, and really proactively address it within our organizations, our schools, our workplace? Can design and art support inclusion of marginalized populations? How can diversity and inclusion respond to membership engagement and retention challenges, which, as an organization 100 years old with 24,000 members in 72 chapters, we are dealing with an incredible diversity of people, of places, of types, of disciplines, and we have to sort of ask ourselves this question. And finally, where can designers make strides in making design more accessible? We have with us today three amazing practitioners that are working in very different ways around this notion of implicit bias. To start with, I'm going to call Jamal Bell, who is with the Corwin Institute at The Ohio State University. Hello, Jamal. Welcome. And then we have Dario Fidanza from Austin, Texas, who is a designer with experience in UX, UI, print, fashion, you name it. He's done it all. And he's affiliated to the Austin, Texas chapter of AIGA. And finally, Kim Hobson, who is an artist, a curator, a studio artist based in Austin as well, who did not know Dario before, and who is going to talk to us about a special project that she developed in partnership with the ESA and the Austin chapter of AIGA. So what we'll do is that we'll have each of these amazing people present their sort of statement and project and how they utilize communication and design and art to facilitate the conversation around stereotypes and implicit bias. And then we will reconvene everyone for a conversation. I encourage you all to start sending your questions, and we will direct those questions along the way to each of the speakers. Thank you. So we're going to start with Jamal.
All right. Hello. Again, my name is Jamal Bell, and in my short presentation, I'm going to give you a primer on implicit bias. This will not be an exhaustive dive into the study of implicit bias, but rather an introduction where I will define it, how it develops in all of us, how it affects employment, and solutions to debiasing. I will also expose some myths and confusion about implicit bias. Next slide. Implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Some believe that implicit bias is nothing more than beliefs people choose not to tell others. They know how they feel. They just know they cannot or should not say those beliefs out loud, so they hide them. However, implicit bias is different from suppressed thoughts that we may conceal to appear politically correct. Implicit biases are activated involuntarily and is beyond our awareness or intentional control. Some people feel implicit bias is merely stereotyping. Although they are related, and can be easily confused. Where stereotyping is a deliberate process, which you are aware of, implicit bias is involuntary. When we talk about implicit bias, it's important to mention that we all have them. Bias is a natural phenomenon that our brains are constantly forming automatic associations as a way to better and more effectively or efficiently understand the world around us. So no one is a bad person for harboring implicit biases. These are natural human processes that occur on an unconscious level. In terms of the existence of unwanted negative implicit biases that do not match our explicit beliefs, our brains are malleable, giving us the capacity to mitigate their effects through research-based debiasing strategies. Next slide. Implicit bias operates in our subconscious, and research shows that we are all susceptible to harnessing them based on characteristics like skin tone, income, sex, weight, accent, disability, and race. These implicit associations can even go as far as to affect our behavior towards others, even if we want to treat people equally or genuinely believe we are egalitarian. Implicit biases are robust and pervasive, and we are exposed to direct and indirect messages, social experiences throughout the course of our lifetime that can implicitly influence our thoughts and evaluations of others. So it's possible to harbor negative associations of our own culture also. Next slide. Implicit bias comes from and is formed from our background, our cultural environment, and our personal experiences. Biased media representation, social experiences, repeated exposure to stereotypical associations and prejudices, which become automated in our long-term memory. Next slide. The main effects research shows how implicit bias affects employment are disability bias, racial bias, similar to me effect, basically meaning that you can go into an interview and the person that you're interviewing sees your resume and say, hey, this person is just like me. They went to the same school. They also have a military background. And you tend to start to favor that person implicitly, ask the more favorable questions. You don't even know that you're doing that based on your next interviewee, that you probably don't see that connection. Therefore, you don't have that same type of positive questioning that you gave to the person that's similar to you. And you didn't even realize you did that. You're just going with the flow as far as interviewing candidates for that job. A beauty bias. There's been research that's shown that people who are more beautiful have a better chance of getting jobs. And obviously beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but there has been research to show that. Confirmation bias in performance evaluations. Sometimes people can harbor these implicit associations about a certain type of person they could be. There's been research to show they did it as far as it was a letter test where an African American, they had several tests done by an African American and several tests done by letters done by a Caucasian with those types of names. So it was like an African American name and a Caucasian name, but it was the same paper with the same amount of errors. And what they found is the person who had the African American name received more errors or received a worse grade than the person who was white. And so sometimes that bias of, I expect this African American to not write well, therefore becomes a confirmation bias of, see, this is true, I'm finding all these errors, where there was a different level of errors, different level of an association based on the white author. I really want to refer to our website for detailed information, research, and examples on implicit bias. It's at the bottom of the slide. It's go.osu.edu/implicit bias. I wish I had more time to dive into the detail, but there's just so much packed in, and it goes into so many different areas. So I really want to refer everyone to that website. Next slide. As I mentioned before, our brains are malleable. Therefore, any negative associations we have we can be made aware of, and we can be de-bias ourselves. This can be done by taking an implicit association test. There's a website called Project Implicit, and it's an organization that develops various tests to help us discover our implicit biases and actually offer different ways of de-biasing ourselves. What's really cool about this presentation today is, getting a sneak peek from the other presenters. They actually are doing some of the solutions to de-bias. Intergroup contact, which is basically getting involved in different groups that's outside your own cultural group, which is part of, killing some of the stereotypes or counter-stereotyping experiences. Implicit bias training, deliberative processing, which we're also going to see where there's a deliberate process of trying to dispel stereotypes stereotypes and implicit bias through programming, or with employment in terms of creating a standardized way of interviewing, so therefore that similar to me effect is mitigated, or the beauty bias is mitigated because you're saying that you're going to follow these different steps as you interview and as you go through the hiring process. Empowering diversity inclusion teams, giving organizations, having those diversity inclusion teams being empowered to talk about these issues, to develop these type of presentations that we're seeing today, and taking the perspective of others. We see that through art, where we'll have different exhibitions where a lot of the art is someone else's perspective, and then you're bringing in a diverse group to look and be a part of this person's perspective, and then you taking that art as an individual and putting taking that perspective of that artist. Research has shown us that implicit bias has huge implications in many realms, including hiring, promotion, the images we use in designing, which relates to beauty, height, or weight bias. This was a very brief primer on implicit bias, and if you're interested in diving deep into the research and examples, please visit the website below on the slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamal. This is a great introduction to provide the background and the basics of definitions and terms, because a lot of those are a little confusing for people, right? Sometimes people confuse implicit bias and bias, or as you said, implicit bias and stereotypes.
You were the director of communications. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying what's really important to distinguish like stereotype and implicit bias is, for one, implicit bias is an attitude. So, and sometimes the stereotype can be a position that someone takes. It's explicit, it's conscious, and an attitude is something that can happen very briefly, without you knowing immediately. And you won't know until either after you've done it or someone calls you out on it, and you're like, I didn't see myself doing that. That's what I did. It's like, you can have a spouse that says, well, why are you so grumpy? And you don't see why you're grumpy, and you don't know why you're grumpy. And then it takes a while for that conversation to happen. Oh, that's why I was grumpy today.
Right.
And sometimes.
So which one do you think is more of a social construct?
Well, I think implicit bias informs social construction. So I think it's not implicit bias is created through culture, but I think, or is a social construct. I think it's more of, you have different social constructs in play based on, like media misrepresentation, exposure, personal experiences, social experiences, what your parents taught you, your parents' experiences. So if you have parents that never had, a diverse friends, and they've always had white friends or always had black friends, and you only see one part of the culture, and then the rest of your view of the culture is through media. You tend to inform about that culture through media, so that part is the social construct, but it's that long-term of that constant exposure of the other from a distance and being informed by that becomes, it could turn into an implicit association. So if you lived in, I could say, Italy your whole life, and all you've seen from America about African Americans is, gang movies and crime, if you are an Italian coming over to the United States to visit a friend, you may have implicit associations about African Americans as you walk through the streets of New York. And so, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the Italian is, racist right away. It's just, this is all they've been exposed to. And so it becomes automatic when they finally go to New York and see a lot of African Americans that they've never had exposure to in an intergroup way. So they never had African American friends in Italy. They've never.
No, but I think they have a lot of incoming Africans right now in the form of migrants that probably change a lot of their perception of race in relationship to race. We'll continue afterwards. This is fascinating. Thank you. I'm going to invite our second speaker now. So we'll see you later, Jamal. We'll bring Kim Hobson, the artist from Austin, Texas. Sorry, I'm hearing myself speak. Who is involved in amazing arts community projects and has collaborated with an organization called VSA. She will talk to you about giving voice. Kim, can you come to us on the screen?
Hi. Hello. Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me.
We can hear you. Yes, and we can see your slideshow.
Awesome. Okay. Hi.
Go for it.
Yeah. So hi. My name is Kim Hobson. And just before I get into giving voice, I want to give a little bit of background about myself. So I have been an art and design educator for over 10 years, and I also have a disability. So I'm missing my left arm, and so it's a disability that's not a big deal, has not changed the way I teach, the way I go through life, but it is a disability nonetheless. And so when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's very, very relevant to myself. And obviously to this art experience. So I got involved in giving voice through an amazing, wonderful person named Amber Atkins from IBM Austin. She is also the co-director of education and mentorship through AIGA, and so she invited me to get involved in giving voice. And so both she and the art promotions chair for VSA Texas, April Sullivan, we got together and we planned out the first annual Giving Voice. So let's go ahead and next slide. Okay, so a few details about the show. So what we did is we paired 8 design professionals or design educators with 8 students who were referred to us by April at VSA Texas, which, by the way, VSA Texas is the Texas Organization on Arts and Disability. So we paired these designers with these teenagers. They're all teenagers. And then they met at 3 different workshops at the VSA campus, and then they collaborated on creating a design for a poster. And all of those posters have a certain message or viewpoint or social cause. Okay, so there are lots of themes to be unpacked with giving voice. First off, there's this idea of disability that permeates the whole, the whole idea. There's lingo, there's social norms that you have to kind of explore. So, as an example, so I have a disability. Mine is a physical disability. Like, for instance, I am not necessarily happy with the word handicap. It's a very, very old school term. I have one of those little handicap parking tags, and I'm not necessarily happy that it says handicap on there, but I'm also happy to have the parking tag. But it's not necessarily the best verbiage. I guess I prefer disabled, but I don't even really like that word either. And I don't like the fact that we have to have all of this unique language surrounding disability, because it does create bias. It does create these ideas that, oh, this person is disabled, so they can't do this, or they are strange, or they are someone that you should proceed with caution. And none of that is true, but it is because of this vocabulary that it happens. So for instance, for my own personal experience, because I'm missing a limb, the term that I would prefer is limb different. But most people don't know those terms because it's, you know, disabilities in general, a lot of people are not necessarily open to accommodating those specific needs when it comes to verbiage, when it comes to lingo. It can be very, very tricky. And so, for instance, with people who are on the autistic spectrum, there's a lot of perceived ideas about social norms. You know, a lot of people on the spectrum have a very different perception of how people should be socially, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, communication. And we did see some of that during the Giving Voice, during all of the different workshopping and collaboration that happened during the show. But let's go ahead and look at some artwork, and then I'm going to talk about these themes as we look at the different posters. So next slide. Okay, so this is a poster called More Than You Know. This one was by David and Max. And so it is extremely awesome poster. And as you can see, it's all about bees. These little guys, you know, please help protect the bees. And so Max had a really interesting perspective. You know, there a lot of times in design, a lot of times in art, I feel like as professionals, we want to have like that unique outside of the box experience viewpoint. We want to find unique ways of looking at things. But because of our education and because we're in this corporate setting or we're in an academic setting, we're unable to do that because everything is so structured. Well, luckily, you know, as in this case, Max was all over the place. He had a very, very unique perspective, and so this is a good example of working with individuals who think differently. It is something that should be treasured and enjoyed, and something that should be lifted up when it comes to collaboration. People who are on the autistic spectrum a lot of time think very uniquely, and it's something that is it's an asset to a roundtable discussion, to planning out some kind of design project, to creating art. And so, as you can see in this, in the reflections that are on the left side of the poster, first off, Max is a huge fan of IBM, and he's a fanboy. And so, as he states, and so he was really excited to work with David because David works at IBM. And on top of that, you know, one of the big things that people in the IBM Design Studio that they complete are design thinking. Within design thinking, there are these things called empathy maps. And so, even though a lot of times people who are autistic have issues with empathy, with thinking about how others feel, other perceptions outside of their own, they did a great job. And I mean, there was like empathy, like web map stuff everywhere. There were little sticky notes everywhere. There were sketches everywhere when the two of these individuals worked together. And obviously, it worked out great. So, but once again, it was an interesting collaboration because I'm sure that there were a few challenges, at least at the beginning, because it's not going to be your standard collaboration process. Okay, next slide. So this one is called Don't Bully, and the mentors were Mark and Brianna, and the mentee Danielle. And so this is a great example of you know, of targeting a specific subject matter that's relevant to a specific audience. So bullying it's a huge problem. It is a huge problem. It's a huge problem with like throughout our society when that comes to education in schools, with people with disabilities. It's a huge problem for teenagers in general. And so I think this subject matter, focusing on this particular issue, is prevalent. It's very relevant to not only to Danielle, obviously it was relevant in her life, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed on a broader spectrum when it comes to teenagers and education and the way people with disabilities, people that are different, the way that they're treated. So it was obviously a very, very successful project between the three of these individuals. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this one is called Sweet Freedom, and the mentor is Russell, and the mentee is Madison. I absolutely love this one. It's so beautiful. What you feel is real. Listen to your heart, and you will be free. I just absolutely love it. So this is a amazing example of being okay with feeling uncomfortable. You have to embrace it, and these two people collaborated. As you can see in the reflection, I'm just going to read it because I just think it's like Russell's reflection is just perfect. I have learned so much from my interactions with Madison and the Giving Voice program. I have a better understanding and appreciation of the challenges that young people face today. I am truly thankful for this opportunity and will apply this experience in my workplace and in my classroom. And that's amazing, and Madison, she said, I am a creative, intelligent person who loves trying new things. I also want to find myself. That just sounds like a teenager. She just happens to be a teenager that also has a disability, which is, you can see it's very relevant in the artwork, but it's just a beautiful collaboration. Okay, next slide. Okay, and this one is Water Conservation by Randy and Natalie. This is a really great example of non-traditional mentoring. So when these two people got together to do their workshopping, I think they were kind of at a loss at what to do, and so Randy just took Natalie out around the VSA property, and they just took pictures because he asked her, what are you passionate about? And she said, I love nature, and I love flowers. And so they went and they took pictures of flowers, and they came back and well, how can we help protect what you love? And so that's how they came to the water conservation, because without water we wouldn't have flowers. And this was a really, really great example of how sometimes you have to uniquely collaborate with people. It's not always going to be cookie cutter. And I mean, and as professionals, as professional educators or as professional designers, or both, I mean, every project's going to be different, and so you have to kind of approach everything differently. Okay, next slide. Okay, so a couple of notes about some decisions that I made as curator. I thought that the process was just as important as the product. The posters turned out amazing, beautiful, wide array of topics and issues that were relevant to these individuals, both mentors and mentees. But also the process, it was fascinating for me. I felt like almost like I was like this weird like scavenger. I was like taking all of the little clippings off the tables and all of the brainstorming, all of the empathy maps and the sticky notes and everything. And I felt like I was just trying to pair together, okay, so like how did they come to this conclusion together as a mentor mentee? And so we ended up putting all of the brainstorming materials for each pairing in these little plexiglass frames and then hanging them next to the artwork. And so it was a really interesting journey, so that the viewer, the audience, can see the journey that each pairing went through as they were creating these works of art. Also, I mean, all of the subject matter of all of the different posters were very wide array. I mean, there were two that covered kind of bullying or being different. There were some environmental issues, but for the most part, they were all so different. So we wanted to reflect that in the show. And above everything else, giving voice, I was a curator, but I mean, I was more of an organizer, I would say, of the materials than an actual curator, because I wasn't picking and choosing what would get selected. I was seeing how all of these voices could be heard visually in a way that was stimulating, but also in a way that was interesting and that there would be a good flow in the actual show. So yeah, okay, next slide. Okay, and so some final thoughts. So the diversity between all of the different individuals, I feel, was very well captured in the show. Because all of the participants, especially the ones who are on the spectrum, they were all in different areas of the spectrum. So we had some very high functioning individuals who were really, really good at collaboration and were really like, yeah, let's just do this thing. And then we had a couple of individuals who, you know, it just took a little more time, took a little bit more effort, especially on the mentor's part. You know, it was, you know, just different. And so that was something that was very unique about the project. But it genuinely showed the inclusion that there are all these different viewpoints, but overall these mentees, they were able to collaborate, to learn from people that were in a field that they possibly want to go into, and obviously giving them a voice to a topic that was extremely personal and important to them. And as you know, for anyone, that's, you know, that's one of the most important things, is to be able to have your voice being heard. And sadly, because people have so much bias on disability, sometimes it's very hard for those voices to be heard. So that's why this program was such a great, you know, opportunity for everyone involved. And the mentors also, a lot of the reflections that I was able to, you know, to read at the end of the show, they're stating, you know, that they didn't know quite how they were going to do without, because many of the mentors didn't have a background in education, definitely not a background in special ed. And so they were not quite sure how it was going to work out. But I mean, it was unanimously, they were like, I will do it again. And I really hope they will do it again, because we are gearing up for Giving Voice 2017. Yeah, I mean, it was just an amazing experience for everyone involved. I'm very, very proud to be involved in it as the curator, and it was a great experience. And I think AIGA it was just amazing being able to sponsor the show. So that's about it.
I'll keep it short so that we make sure we leave room for Dario. I have one quick question for you. VSA, can you tell us one word about it? And is this program, Giving Voice, a national program?
Yes. So VSA Texas is the Texas program for arts and disabilities, and so they do a lot of amazing programming all over the state for all types of individuals who identify as having a disability, both physical, mental, and all kinds of art, not just visual, but performing arts, you know, music and dance and theater, all of those. So an amazing, organization. We enjoyed working with them and enjoy continuing to work with them.
So VSA is a national organization. They have chapters throughout the U.S., correct? Right. And the Giving Voice came from the chapter in Austin. And the Giving Voice project came from AIGA Colorado, but then came to Austin via Amber. And who knows, maybe other chapters would like to pick up the program and apply it in their own city or state.
Yeah, that would be absolutely amazing. It's such a great program. I hope that it does.
Okay, thank you. So we'll see you in a bit. I'm going to go call now Dario. Dario Fidanza is a designer specializing in UX and experience design, print, packaging, fashion, you name it. And he's going to talk to us about his involvement with Youth, a nonprofit organization based in Austin, Texas, who is working towards empowering youth, LGBTQ youth. So go for it, Dario. Talk to us about what you did for this nonprofit.
Thank you, Leticia. I'm really honored to be here and happy to share about this project. It's really close to my heart. I worked on it last year And in doing this, I just hope to inspire you guys out there to use your design powers for good in your local communities. Like Leticia said, I'm a traditional graphic designer with about 12 years of experience in print. And I dabbed a little bit in fashion design. I worked in film. I do packaging as well. And I've been shifting my focus recently towards digital design. I'm originally from Argentina. I'm the UX Small Talks chair here in AIGA Austin, and I'm also an organizer for a local design meetup community called Fresh to Design. I identify as a gay male. And in recent years, I've just been trying to connect that with another aspect of my life, which is design. Mostly, I'm trying to focus more into interaction design and human-centered design. So with that, next slide. I wanted to share about last year. I had the opportunity to work with a very special team, Mina Adame, which is also a visual designer, Jen Wilson, a researcher, and myself. We collectively wanted to put our design skills into practice, especially IDEO's method for human-centered design, and help a local Austin entity. The organization which I chose to work with is called Out Youth, like Leticia said. They serve kids from ages 12 to 17 in the LGBTQ sector. They do work a lot with trans kids, and they provide access to services, physical and mental health programs, support for the kids and their families, as well as overall creating a safe community so that these kids can develop their own sense of identity. Next slide, please. Our youth is a remodeled space. It became an Austin landmark in the 90s. So they were, we're here in Texas, so I just want to create that context. It's a Republican state, and in some ways, it's thinking a lot behind the curve. So this group, they've been pioneers through those times where LGBTQ groups were even more marginalized than they are today. And they still remain strong, advocating for our rights. As with many nonprofits organizations, some of the common issues were present. They were understaffed and underpaid, overworked employees working in silos, as well as with very limited physical space and a budget. But they do have a very popular and unique program that is in high demand. Next slide. So we set out with our team to research and try to understand from a human-centered perspective what was the organization like from the inside, not only just their structure, but also learn the participants, the members, the youth, predisposition, their challenges, the joy, to help them see them from an unbiased point of view. What we discover through that research. We use different methods to go through this process, geodata analysis and mapping to help us understand their reach within Austin and in the surrounding areas. And then to learn more about them and their personalities, we did contextual interviews, observational studies, and later on we did A/B testing to try some of our solutions. Next slide. Next one, yeah. So after about 4 months of research, we broke down our understanding of what we had the potential to actually affect within the organization. So even though the center of this organization is the youth and their needs, and that's why they exist, we as a team noticed that the red zone here on the left top corner of your screen, that's where we could actually offer our support. In other words, at this point in time, our youth had a very limited way to intake volunteers appropriately, and they had over 1,000 willing people to offer support, but there was no way to process them, to onboard them, to identify their level of commitment, and efficiently deploy them in ways that they could actually help. Next slide. And all that said, a common aspect of human-centered design is that you cast a wide net at the discovery stage, and you try to release all your bias and assumptions. We ended up learning a lot about other parts of the organization, And all of those discoveries ended up becoming part of our deliverable at the end. For example, we categorized their youth members based on whether they had support of their environment, namely their families. Remember, these are underage kids and depend greatly on the family and friends to get around even, or to even just be able to leave the house and assist, our youth programs. So with the help of data mapping of resources, we trace also which subgroups are more likely to need support and a more active engagement from the organization itself. Next slide. We also trace the youth journey, specifically their emotional responses from prior to going to out youth. Most of these kids are being challenged at school. So they're homeschooled and mostly isolated. They don't have the same resources or experiences than any other normal kids outside these groups. Also their families didn't understand them, what they were going through. Imagine puberty is probably challenging enough to any of us. But imagine growing up in an environment without any role models or supports or support groups. So it was really mind-blowing as we were doing the research and learning more about these kids, to see them blossom from really confused teens to really trustful, authentic, successful adults after going through the Out Youth program. We also traced the challenges that each stage presented, each of the touch points, and that was a valuable resource to learn and to be able to share back with the organization itself. Next slide. Finally, we crafted an organizational map declaring some main areas of how they interacted and supported each other. The final deliverable focused on each of these 4 areas of need and offer them strategies on how to grow them. At the top, we see culture, branding, outreach, and staff. These areas were very much connected to each other, and we validated again that no connections were directed to the volunteers. They were essentially isolated in a silo. So that was an opportunity for us to help with. Next slide. So some of the strategies, next slide. In order to help them utilize those 1,000 volunteers in the database, we helped them upgrade their intake form, adding the ability to categorize volunteers' focused interest and their skill level and the commitment to the organization by how much they wanted to invest volunteering. As well as we help them identify a series of qualities that will highlight what we called star volunteers, people on the light blue area on the top right corner. More in depth, we developed a 3-stage system that will allow them to train quarterly a group of volunteers, and from that batch identify future coordinators, which will in turn be in charge of training the next batch. The goal here was to be self-sustaining, so we will alleviate the staff workload rather than put more pressure on them. And also we laid the foundation for workshop development. So for the 4 areas of need defined before, those new volunteers could choose a focus and be onboarded on how to actually help them on those areas as well. Next slide. And the delivery here after 6 months, we created a review of findings, which was a printed book with all of our findings plus delineated strategies to overcome their challenges. Especially we focused on clear communication, documentation, and focused on the most feasible short and long-term solutions. The review is also up on the web as well for them to have a transparent tool. They can have an unbiased view from their organization, so they can be transparent with their boards. They can help them with funding and other internal processes as well. Next slide. And this is where the visual communication was really, really valuable. We created many infographics for the data collected to really boost understanding and perception of the data that we gather. We developed a simple color-coded system we used throughout the document for them to quickly identify effort versus impact. And as I explained, there are a few people on staff, and they're very busy with all the pieces that they need to manage. So we color coded. We used blue to sustain for things that they should maintain or encourage, things that they were already working, like their medical service, their community, and their program. We used yellow for growth. That was for immediate expansion strategies, things that will create, that were impactful, and they actually require little to no effort from the organization to implement. And we have a red for change, things that needed attention, that require them to take action, or that will have great impact, but also might require a little bit higher effort. So yeah, that's all. Next slide. So I know we're going to be chatting a bit more now. So anyone that wants to connect directly with me, I'm a big Twitter user, so my handle is artawake. Would like to hear thoughts and hear about projects as well. And also please visit outyouth.org if you feel compelled to get involved, if you have solutions or strategies or any help to support, or if you just want to donate. They really are doing amazing work here in Austin, Texas, and they really, really, really need your support. So thank you.
Thank you, Dario. Beautiful stories. So I'm going to invite you all to come back. Dario, Kim, and Jamal for our diversity and inclusion webcast on implicit bias. Thank you so much, all of you, for your really informative presentations. We have actually a number of great questions coming from the audience. This is great to see the attendance active and listening. So I'm going to direct some of those questions to you. The first one is probably for Jamal. What can you share around this notion and how it has evolved over time, over the 90s? Like we used to talk about maybe affirmative action as one of the policy that manifested a greater sensitivity to the problem. But now we're hearing a lot about these words, these terms, equity and training and awareness and diversity and inclusion. Like what has changed?
So probably the interesting thing is, I think what, at least in the Kerwin Institute's perspective, is that what we're trying to figure out, why has change been so slow? When we have all of this information and we hope to have more contact, why is change so slow? Why are we still hurting from past policies like redlining communities, which basically denied homeowners insurance to African Americans in certain neighborhoods and immigrants in certain neighborhoods? That has an effect on housing today, even though that's been outlawed since 1960s or 1970s. Why does that still affect our neighborhoods and how we view each other? And so that's why we started to come up on this concept of implicit bias, where it's like, regardless if people feel that they treat people equally, or they say that, hey, I think everybody has the right to do whatever, there's still these attitudes that still manifest themselves in situations. And we feel, as we see with some of our panelists today, that, hey, we have to expose people to other ways of thinking. We need to expose people to other people's perspectives and how they live, and how the way they live matters and their perspective matters. And how, don't look at me different because maybe you see something missing from me. So it's been, so getting into this implicit bias realm and looking at all the different research, we just found that people harbor these biases and don't even know it. And it's this attitude. And we saw with Dario that they went through a deliberate process and a measurement and getting deep into, we don't want this to happen here and while we're doing this. And that's one of those solutions to implicit bias, is this deliberate process. We are going to make sure that we are accounting for our different biases that we may know we have, or biases we may not know we have. And we're going to keep pushing those questions. That's the importance of having the diversity and inclusion teams in different organizations to pay attention to say, why is it that we're hiring this way, or why was your interview conducted with this person this way and conducted with this person a different way? You can't measure those two resumes when you're interviewing them differently. And we need to have a systematic process that measures people equally. And then at the same time, individually, do we want to know if we have implicit biases? Are we afraid to find out? Are we afraid, like, I'll use myself as an example. Am I afraid to find out that I have a negative association towards other Black people? Do I really want to know that? And once I know, how am I going to feel about that? And so even individually, there could be apprehension to even want to know. So we just let our attitudes just go. But, you know, our work has been really around getting people to be comfortable with knowing those, and then say, hey, if you don't agree with those implicit biases you have, because your explicit biases are different, let's figure out a way to change that just through exposure, through intergroup contact, through these different, through art, as our panelists have shown.
So we have another question that can be directed to either you or Dario, perhaps. There's actually a transgender woman who was attending the webcast, and she found access to employment and advancement within the industry to be nearly impossible. This is not only through the personal biases of prospective employers, but also through the negative restrictions on basic HR documents and regulations. Have the presenters any advice and guidelines for such situations?
Well, they work with kids, so I would say yes, they probably have advice. The programming director that we work with directly, her name is Catherine. She's a trans woman, so she could actually offer some advice, I'm sure, if you connect with her. Also, you know, I can't speak to that experience particularly, but I can express that I have been in that receiving end of looking for a job and going in my head knowing that maybe the way that I sound or the way that I look can actually create a bias. So it makes me really insecure when I go through a job interview. So those are real things. My best advice for that is to actually look for companies that have a more open mentality in regards to those type of things, because obviously you don't want to work for someone that is backward thinking, you know, and I know that there is like a lot of companies right now that are having really awesome initiatives, you know, so be on the lookout for that. That would be my first advice, or the one that I can speak to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you are interested in like a particular company or a particular organization, and that organization has a D&I team, a diversity and inclusion team, connect with that team and tell them what your concerns are to see, you know, if they can offer advice, or they could tell you, give you a little background on the organization and where that organization is directed, and so that D&I team also knows that you are looking for that particular job, and you share your concerns with that company. I think, for one, I think that D&I team will want to know that, and I also think it's an opportunity for that D&I team to really involve themselves in that organization on that level, especially since most diversity and inclusion teams are attached to HR. So I really think it's important for those D&I teams and those different organizations to know who's applying for these jobs also. So if you still fall through the cracks of that job, you can follow up and say, hey, is the person that got hired, did they do their interview this way? This is how my interview went. Is this how their interview went? I mean, because I think all of that really matters. And those D&I teams, they need to know that, because they're probably those different.
Not even realizing it.
Mm-hmm. And they may not tell the D&I team because they don't know that they were doing that.
Right. Thank you. We have a lot of questions from the attendees that we can answer after the webcast. We typically provide a number of links and documents and whatever is useful for continuing this conversation and providing tools to our attendees. But I have one more question for Kim before we close this conversation that could possibly last for the entire afternoon. Kim, what was the experience of the actual mentors? The question is, did they have bias themselves?
I think probably. I mean, not maybe in a negative context, of course, but I think we all have bias about disabilities. And so more than likely what I think probably happened was that a lot of the mentors were like, okay, I'm going to do this thing where I'm going to work with these kids who have disabilities. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. And then they showed up and they're probably like, I don't know I have no training in this whatsoever. I don't know anything about autism. I don't know anything about special ed. I don't even really work with kids. And so luckily we had a lot of people on hand at the VSA. And everything turned out lovely and great, and only great experiences. I mean, I'm sure that there was a learning curve, and I'm sure that it was a little bit, there was a touch and go at some points, but luckily all of the mentors were very patient, very open, and it turned out to be a wonderful experience, a very big learning experience, probably like internally for a lot of the mentors. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was definitely a little bit of a learning curve there,
Thank you. Again, thank you so much for your contribution. You've been a great guest, and it's just the tip of the iceberg, obviously, for this conversation that we will continue throughout our diversity and inclusion webcast series. We'll have one more webcast in the fall and figure out other ways in which we can address these type of issues. In fact, we hosted a YouTube live conversation this week, a couple of days ago, with one of the task force members, Aldrina Corder, who talked about her book, her thesis, which deals with colorism. I encourage you all to go visit that YouTube channel of AIGA. So again, thank you, the three of you, Jamal, Dario, and Kim. It's great to meet you. And let's stay in touch. I will direct some of the questions that are more practical to you offline. And then we'll make sure that the website, once we have the video of this conversation, includes all these tools and practical tools. Thank you to our NEA sponsor for this series, and we'll see you in the fall. Happy summer.